To run through the housekeeping arrangements, and I'll introduce everybody on the panel, and then I'll tell you how we're going to get through the business today. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Please can I request everyone to switch electronic devices to silent mode as to not disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the council staff present. The toilets are in the corridor through to that second room. The meeting today is open to the public and will be streamed live and for subsequent broadcast via the Council's website. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during this webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. By entering this meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed. Any member of the public due to speak at the meeting who does not wish to be filmed should say so at the start of their speech. The Chair will suspend the permission to film their contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll start with some introductions. I'm Councillor Ian Horner. I'm the newly elected Chair of the South East LAC. So this is my first, well, it's not my first public meeting with the Chair, but it's my first public meeting as Chair. Councillor Smith.
Councillor Gail Smith, and I represent the Mosborough Ward.
I'm Councillor Glynis Chapman, and I represent Mosborough Ward.
Evening everyone, I'm Councillor Curtis Crossland and I represent Bayton Ward.
I'm Councillor Willis Marshall and I represent Woodhouse Ward.
Councillor Karen McGowan, represent Burley Ward.
And Councillor Matt Dwyer, represent Burley Ward.
Evening everybody, I'm Joe Falls and I'm the South East Local Area Committee's Manager.
That's not.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, I neglected to point out I'm also a councillor for Bayton. So excited to be a new chair. I got carried away with that probably. So just to explain to you, those of you who've read your agenda or those of you who haven't, we have these meetings in different parts of the South East area during the year, and as it happens, fortuitously or otherwise, we are here in Woodhouse on this occasion. We have some formal business to run through. We will try to get through that business as quickly as possible, so that, because I am aware that most of the people here have probably come to talk about the local plan. When we've done our formal business, which we hope will only take about 10 minutes, we will then have a presentation from officers about the local plan, and then you have the opportunity to ask questions. So we will try to get through our formal business quickly. That business does include people who may have questions that are not related to the local plan. If you have a question that's not related to the local plan, please give us your details and we'll give you an answer in due course, because I am conscious of the fact that a lot of people have come wanting to ask questions about the local plan, and I want to give you that opportunity. So unless it's a question where we can say yes or no straight away, then we'll take those away and answer them. Thank you for that. Have we any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Sorry. Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Denise Fox, Tony Downing, and Anne Woolhouse.
There are no items that I'm aware of that require the exclusion of the press and public. So we'll move on from that. Any declarations of interest from the members of the council?
No, Chair.
No? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. Got sight of those? Did anybody get any points of correction on the minutes? No? Okay. So our councillors present happy to accept the minutes? Agreed. Thank you. Any matters arising from the minutes? No. Okay. And now I turn to Jane for the budget report.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to bring you up to date with where we are. For those of you that haven't been to a LAC meeting before, as a South East Local Area Committee, we have £100,000 to spend on projects throughout the South East. Our 4 themes for the South East are crime and community safety, environment, health and wellbeing and children and families. That money is broken down, so you agreed to allocate £50,000 to projects around crime and community safety, £17,000 to projects around environmental issues, and £50,000 respectively to health and wellbeing and children and families. So it was just to bring you up to date and just to let you know that we are in the process at the minute of exploring projects. We've had some discussions. The projects that we're wanting to explore around the crime and community safety theme is the possibility of an enforcement officer, additional crime prevention material, and the possibility of securing an environmental stewardship team for a further year. For environment, we're looking to explore projects around Litter Lotto, an environmental event, any local environmental projects, and continue working with local schools and raising environmental awareness. For health and wellbeing and children and families, we're looking to explore projects around a celebration event for the youth element within the South East area. We previously have undertaken an awards ceremony, but it was a suggestion that we looked at the young element as well throughout the South East. Looking to support local community events, additional support and training for life skills and training, and to also look at additional youth provision throughout the South East. So that's where we are currently. To date, spend-wise, we have spent just over £4,000, so that leaves us £96,000 left, and that was just looking at £89 on administration and £3,934 under the health and wellbeing and children and families element, and that was on the VE Day celebrations. And we'll just go on to show there's a little bit of a presentation after this. So it's just to make you aware that that's where we are. And also, there are sheets at the back of the room. If anyone has any particular ideas or suggestions for any of those 4 things that I've just mentioned, if you could please just jot it down on the sheet at the back and either leave your contact details or further information of where we can obviously pursue those themes. So the report is for noting. Just to note that at present we've spent just over £4,000.
We've got a question in the audience. You can take it. I don't take any questions.
Oh, yeah.
Scott, have you got the microphone? Sorry, I should have said at the start, there is to be a roving microphone, so you don't have to shout at them. Well, you may want to shout at us, but you don't have to.
Hi there, hope you can hear me okay. The question I was going to ask is, what's the decision-making input into where this money's spent, and what public input do you derive from that decision-making process?
So our 4 themes are based on public consultation that we undertook. It is 2 years ago, but that's where we got the 4 themes from. So any ideas that then come forward, it's based on obviously information that we've received from local members, local voluntary organisations, or to be fair, anything. So if we're looking at celebration events, then that would come from local community groups. The decision is taken by the local area committee members if we would fund that scheme or not. But that's what the decision. So it's based on, the themes are based on information that was fed back to us during consultation. We did an online and in-person consultation about 2 years ago.
Okay, and in terms of the input into that, which focus group was it exactly?
It wasn't a specific, it was an individual, so we did different focus groups. So we would go around, so for example, if there were mother and toddler groups throughout the South East area, or knit and natter type groups, or if we've had local area committee, we've had themed meetings, focus groups at the end of the meeting, where people have had a discussion around what's important to them. So the last public meeting that we had, which was up at Burley, was a crime-themed meeting. So the information that was fed back to us there, so some of the information was around that people didn't feel that they got enough information back from the police, There was a fear factor around some of the areas not being lit well enough. There were some issues around environment. It was a whole host of things. So what we tend to do when we have a public meeting is we would normally theme that meeting, and we'd have discussions with people that come and get them to understand, obviously get to understand what their view is and what their concerns are, and then that's fed into the plan that we've got.
But to be clear, the decision-making process as to what schemes move forward is purely decided by councillors, is that right?
We have the final decision, yeah, on whether that scheme goes ahead or not.
Just to say, if you want to pursue that further with us, as I said at the beginning, because of the people who come to the local plan, if you want to give us your details, if there's any other questions you want to ask on that matter, we're happy to take those offline, as it were, if that's helpful. Thank you. Okay. Okay, colleagues, is everyone happy with the budget report?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Feedback from the VE Day celebrations.
Okay. So we just wanted to feed back to you. So one of the things that as a local area committee supported was the VE Day celebrations, because that was fed back to us at a previous meeting, that was what was important, that local events were celebrated. So as a local area committee, we offered a grant scheme of up to £4,000, and I think groups could bid up for up to £250. So that went live, and we had, I think it was 18 bids that we received. So the groups that we funded were the S12 Community Pantry, they had a celebration event. Freshfield Community Centre, they held a family barbecue. The Sheffield Woodhouse Scouts had an afternoon tea. Waterthorpe Nursery and Infant School had a children's party. SF4SD had a 1950s evening. Bacon Tora had an afternoon tea and barbecue. Brunswick Gardens Residents Association had a street party. Woodhouse and District Community Forum had a VE Day party. Crystal Peaks Health Walk Group had a celebration brunch. Freshfield Library had a VE Day week. Bacon District Guides had a street party. Westfield Community Group held a VE Day lunch club. Charnock Hall Academy had a VE Day party, as did Hackenthorpe Lunch Club. Althorpe Walking Group had a coach trip to the National Arboretum. Thank you very much. Bacon Village Development Trust had a choir concert. Medlock Street Party had a street party, and Mosborough History Meeting Group had a celebration event, and Woodhouse Community Play Group had a 1940s party. So whenever we give money out, obviously we always ask for feedback and information of how that event's gone. So some of the summary of the feedback that we received was, you can read it up there, I'll just go through it quickly. It's probably going to remain in the memories, giving them a unique memory of the past. Thank you for giving our families the chance to share this experience together. Some people that attended events are going to now continue to engage in some of Woodhouse District Community Forum's weekly activities. The children had an amazing time. They were all so happy, and each received a medal for their good behaviour throughout the session. This 80th celebration hopefully will install an historical event that children will remember. The activity was very successful. I won't read through them all, but we can send you this out. As you can see, the feedback that we received was phenomenal, really. Some of the feedback was it's really important to celebrate what it means to be British in our history. Developing British values in young children is vital if we are to shape the next generation of citizens. The VE Day celebrations our children experienced on the 80th anniversary while at Waterthorpe School will hopefully be a wonderful memory they hold all their lives. Without the grant, we would not have had the funds to have the ice cream man at the school. So, like we say, there's a whole host of things. I think, obviously, for community celebration, it was really, really successful. So these are just some pictures, as you can see, of the events. So that's, I'll not read pictures, you can see it at the top. Okay, do you want to flick through it? Yeah. Yeah, keep going on. That's it. Thank you. So excellent feedback. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And, I think they were very certainly, speaking of the event that I went to, they were very well received and really good events and an important anniversary for us all to remember. Right, on to public questions and petitions. This is about non-plan questions. So if anybody's got any questions that are not related to the local plan, as I said at the beginning, because we realise most people are here for the local plan. I want to get to that and give people maximum time. So unless it's an easy answer question, we'll get back to you.
Hi there. Yeah, I do have a question, and it's not related to the plan, but it's what brings me here this evening in actual fact. The council have entered into a contract with a contractor for the renewal, the repair and the maintenance of all road infrastructure for a set period. Now, this was a number of years ago. What I'm finding is that the road is falling into disrepair. It's not being repaired in a timely manner. And also, with this contract, Sheffield City Council or the contract administrator, and quite often when complaints come in, it's been given to the contracting party to investigate, which is a conflict of interest as well. They've got a clear conflict there that they, not to resolve the issue because it will cost them money. This has been experienced certainly where I live in Akenthorpe along Bayton and Sheffield Road, and after 2 years that section of road finally got repaired. However, it took quite a great effort to do that. As part of that process as well, I've repeatedly asked to see the Chief Executive on this on a number of occasions, and the question's been completely ignored. Sheffield City Council have an obligation to administer that contract, and it's something that's not being done, and it's costing the council money, and it's particularly affecting this area of Sheffield in the southeast, where we're seeing such a poor state of repair for the roads. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that, really, and certainly why my request to see the Chief Executive on this has been ignored.
I agree with you entirely. It's a disgrace. The way that they've been performing under this contract is shocking. We're going back to Pothole City, and we ought to be actually having an investigation as to why, after such a relatively short period of time, the roads are falling apart again. Couldn't agree more.
Well, it's not just that. Sheffield City Council, the contract administrator for this contract they've entered into, and to actually have a contracting party investigate the poor state of repair is not always a massive conflict of interest. Somebody's being paid to administer that contract at Sheffield City Council, and that's clearly not happening. I'd like to know from the councillors what your approach is on this, and what's going to be fed back to the council to bring them to the table on this, because if it's really frustrating. If you ought to, for example, where I live in Akenthorpe, when I first complained about the state of the road, and it was in a terrible state, it took about 2 years in total, and numerous emails and exchanges with people in the local authority. And it was only really where I got quite strong in the end where they made a decision to actually do that road. But that shouldn't have to happen, that really. It shouldn't take 2 years. And the council really should take some responsibility for administering the contract that they've entered into. This is costing everybody in Sheffield a lot of money. And the question I'd like to know is why? Why is it not being maintained? Why is the contract not being administered? And why can't we get a response from the council? It seemed a relatively simple request for somebody to meet with me to explain the issues. No one's in 2 years I've been sending these emails off. No one's come back to me at all. They've avoided the question, and I just don't think it's good enough.
Okay, so look, if you leave your details, we will pursue that matter. I mean, I'm on the local council for Bacon, so it's Councillor Crossland.
Yeah, with all due respect though, I've been sending these emails for the past 2 years and I've not got a great deal of response. I think somebody should take responsibility for this, I really do.
Can I ask you, sir, who are you, when you say you've been sending a lot of emails, who have you been sending them to?
I've been copying in the ward councillors, I've been copying in the director responsible for the highways, and I've also been copying the chief exec, all of which have, ignored the response. They've passed it on to the contracting party to respond. Can you believe that?
I'm not going to comment on that, but what I am going to say is reiterate what the chair said. We want to help you. If you could give us more information, we'll make sure that we together collectively ask the right questions to the right people.
Well, I'm happy to share the audit trail on it, but as I say, I've not got any response really that's worthwhile.
So you're not the person that I had a conversation with about? I did actually have a phone conversation with somebody.
It could well be. Somebody did phone me, one of the councillors. I'm not sure whether it was yourself.
Me.
Yeah.
That was myself. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So yeah. So I'm quite happy. It's a matter for Democratic Services to answer why you've not had one from the chief exec. But if you get back to me again, Councillor Ian, I'm happy to pursue that again.
Yeah, as I say, I'm quite happy to share the audit trail.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is it working? Oh, yes. So, excuse me a little bit, I'm autistic, so if I waffle on, shut me up. We're a newly formed group, Friends of Tithe Born. We're over 100 plus members. We are currently working alongside universities of Sheffield and Hallam to build and strengthen community bonds and education provision, because there's no A-level provision in south east of Sheffield. They don't expect our children to go to university. University of Sheffield let me do a PhD, sent me to America to do community development work. So I've set a Friends of Tithe Born up in gym. Could members of LAC please come and visit us?
Yes, leave us your details. We'll get that sorted. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other public questions? Before we go on to the plan. Yeah, Scott. Sorry. Oh, hang on. There's one at the back, I think.
Yeah, Bill Smith. Yeah, basically these minutes they don't seem to correlate to what actually happened in that meeting. So there's at least 2 points missing on this list of minutes. That's the first thing. The second thing on 31.9 for Councillor Owner. I don't know what the state of play is with the drone, but it was something to do with China, I believe. Because I've got you some information on drones. The day after I phoned, I got in touch with a mate who's in Afghan at the moment. As for equalling every few weeks, if you don't use your flight qualification, that's not the case at all. So you just keep yourself in date by doing your flying hours. So I don't see how pilots are being grounded, and that's, from a specialist in that area. And as for supplier drones, there's plenty of British companies that are supplying commercial drones to the highest spec possible. So there's no reason why our South Yorkshire Police Force can't get their hands on these drones a lot quicker than what was intimated at that meeting. Thank you.
Quick answer to that question is that was the information supplied by South Yorkshire Police. The National Police, whatever it's called, chief police officers, had put a freeze on buying drones. I don't yet know whether that's been lifted. The next meeting, the Police and Crime Panel, is in fact next Monday. So the information you were supplied was the information supplied to us at the time by South Yorkshire Police. So I can't say more than that.
No worries. I'll address me things to South Yorkshire Police then. Cheers.
Gentleman down the front, and then I think that's it, so we can get on to the local plan.
Just to reiterate on that chap said about the roads, live on a fairly quiet road. It's
busy but not over the top. They came and repaired some curbstones. While repairing the curbstones, they destroyed the road. Now the road is all breaking up. 12 months later, we're now getting potholes everywhere from just repairing a few curbstones. The problem is, every time the bin wagon comes, it goes on the footpath and shoves the curbstones down. So the road is getting worse and worse because they destroyed the curbstone, you know, because they replaced the curbstones by not doing it properly. So where do I, you know, it's everywhere. Wherever they've resurfaced roads or done any repairs, they sort of shoddy repairs.
If you want to leave your details and let whichever local councillor it is look into that. I am aware of the fact that, you know, I've reported damage to even at the end of my road because I live in the middle of my ward, and they repaired that damage, but they didn't repair damage that was within about a foot of it.
Well,
so I find that.
They caused the damage by repairing.
So you know, I've ever.
The big wagons had shut down, and then just left it. I mean, I don't mind it being there because it's slowing the car down. Because if the traffic lights are at green at the bottom, they come flying up. It's a narrow road, and no matter what you say to people, they're still doing 50 and 60 miles an hour every time they bring past their house, and they use it as a rat rod trying to miss the traffic lights out at town end.
Yeah, we'll give him your details.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? So we'll now proceed on to. Oh, hang on. Well, we've got one more. Sorry.
I just want to say that, bearing in mind that we can't maintain the roads we've already got, I mean, this does relate to the planning, really. How are we going to, you know, cope with a whole load of new roads and new infrastructure? You know, we're not maintaining what we've got. It doesn't give a lot of confidence in what's going to happen. And I think, you know, we should be maintaining what we've got first and putting that right to give us the confidence to put in a whole load of new. We're going to need so much more.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that's a question you could put in relation to the planning, local plan question. But there we are. Thank you very much. And so, without further ado, he says, because I'm conscious, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of people who want to come and ask questions on the local plan. I'll now hand over to the planning officers to make their presentation. Come forward and introduce yourselves. You need a microphone. Yeah. So what's now going to happen, the planning officers are going to give you a presentation on the plan, and then we'll open it up to public questions. I'll try and take as many questions as possible. I do urge people to be as brief as they can be. I understand these are complex questions, so that I can get in as many people as possible in asking their questions. And I'm aware at the moment it's relatively cool in here. I know that the strength of feeling on this. I was particularly struck at council by how well behaved the protesters were at the council and put their case clearly and fairly, and I urge everybody to do that and listen to what the officers have to say and then ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start by introducing the four of us who are here to answer your questions this evening. I will then go on and just give a brief presentation just to introduce the subject. I know a number of you have been at the drop-in event prior to the meeting this evening, so you will have seen some of the material. But I think it's probably useful just to go through that again, some of that again in a bit more detail. So my name's Simon Vincent. I'm a Strategic Planning Service Manager at the Council. I'll just hand to my colleagues for them to introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Will Stewart. I'm Director of Planning, Investment and Climate Change.
Hello, I'm Mike Johnston. I'm Head of Planning at the City Council.
Hi, Laura Stevens, Local Plan Team Lead.
Okay. Can we have the next slide, please? Right, I'm just going to start just by introducing some of the issues this evening. I want to just start by talking about the Sheffield Plan process so far. So although these are additional sites that we're talking about now, quite a lot of work has already been done in preceding years around the Sheffield Plan. The draft plan was published in October 2023, and I want to just say a little bit about how much development was proposed in that plan and where. Explain why Greenbelt release is being proposed now. Also what happens if we don't provide more land for development. I'll say a little bit about how the additional sites were selected and provide an overview of the sites before just introducing how you can have your say and explaining what other consultation events are happening and what happens next. So the Sheffield Plan process has been going on for some time. The consultation on the Sheffield Plan issues and options took place in autumn 2020. There then followed a draft plan, which was published for consultation in January 2023. And the plan was submitted for public examination in October 2023, when 3 government planning inspectors were appointed to assess whether the plan followed all the rules and regulations set out in national policy. The examination has been ongoing since the plan was submitted to the government, and a number of public hearings were held over several weeks between June and November last year. And at the end of the hearings in November, the inspectors said they had some concerns about aspects of the plan and that they would write to the council to set out their preliminary conclusions. And their main concerns were about the housing and employment land supply as a whole. And so they said they were going to pause the examination for 8 months to allow the council to do further work to address the inspectors' concerns. So the plan that was originally submitted in October 2023, that proposed a significant amount of development right across the city. There were 370 sites allocated for development, providing capacity for 34,700 additional homes, and that includes windfall sites, which windfall sites are those sites which are not identified specifically in the plan, but we expect to come forward over the plan period as planning applications. The plan also allocated 184 hectares of land for employment. We argue that any shortfall in employment land supply would be met by windfalls, but the inspectors haven't accepted that point. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The plan proposed the release of 1 brownfield site in the Greenbelt. That's the former Norton Aerodrome, where it proposed 270 homes. So that's a brownfield site in the Greenbelt. And I think it's important to recognise the council did not want to release any greenfield land in the Greenbelt at all, so the plan didn't propose any greenfield release in the Greenbelt. And 89% of the housing development that was proposed in the plan was on brownfield sites, and virtually no employment land at all was on greenfield sites. So why is Greenbelt release being proposed now? Well, the inspectors have looked at all the evidence that was presented last year and have decided that there isn't enough land being provided for housing and employment. And that's partly because they think the house building target should be increased to just over 38,000 additional homes over the 17-year period of the plan. And I think it's important to stress that they also made the point that they think more houses are needed to improve the housing mix and provide more affordable homes. So a lot of the housing that was proposed within the plan that was submitted to the government was very much focused on apartments within the city centre, and so the inspectors are very keen to ensure that there's a better mix of housing across the city as a whole. They also think the employment land requirement should be increased to just over 237 hectares. And taking all those things into account, based on the additional requirement for development, plus the land supply, they think additional land for 3,539 homes is needed, and just under 53 hectares of employment land. The inspectors have therefore concluded that exceptional circumstances could exist to justify the release of Greenbelt land, and they asked the council to go away and look again at whether there was any more capacity within the urban areas. our conclusion is that brownfield sites for housing within the urban areas have already been maximised, and that's partly because of the very generous windfall allowance that's been made within the plan and which the inspectors have accepted. So they've accepted almost 7,700 homes will be delivered on windfall sites. We have identified some additional brownfield land for employment, but not enough to meet the shortfall that's been identified by the inspectors. We've also approached neighbouring local authorities again. We've done this a number of times through the local plan process to ask if they're able to meet any of Sheffield's development needs, but they've also got very high housing targets that have been set for them as well. So they've all responded by saying they can't meet Sheffield's housing needs. So what happens if we don't provide more land? Well, it's very likely that the plan would be rejected by the inspectors, and the council would probably be asked to withdraw the plan. And they would be asked to produce a new plan, and the government has said they expect local authorities to produce local plans by December 2026. So the council would need to produce a new local plan within the next 18 months. What that would mean is the council would have to use new government targets, which are even higher than the ones now being proposed by the inspectors. The plan would have to look further ahead, probably to 2042 or 2043, and that would have implications, even further implications, for the use of greenbelt land. The lack of a plan means there's continued uncertainty for developers, communities and infrastructure providers. One of the benefits of having a plan with clear indications of where development will take place is that planned infrastructure can be targeted at where those sites are allocated. It also means the council is unable to apply higher standards, for example, in relation to energy efficiency or space standards for new homes. And actually, without a plan at all, it would leave the council far more open to speculative applications on greenbelt land and greenfield sites, make it difficult for the council to resist planning applications on greenbelt right across the city. So failure to produce a plan, ultimately, if the council doesn't produce a plan at all, the government has said they would potentially step in and take over plan making in the city. And that would mean a loss of democratic control over plan making in Sheffield. So how were the additional sites selected? Well, the inspectors agreed that officers could consider sites that have already been promoted by landowners and developers as part of the local plan process, and just over 100 sites have been promoted through various stages of consultation. We've looked at the economic, social and environmental impacts of all the sites, and we've also assessed how the sites perform against the purposes of greenbelts. So greenbelts are a planning tool, a designation which is applied through local plans, and it's predominantly about maintaining the openness of land. There are two particular purposes which are relevant to the sites we've considered. One is about preventing urban sprawl, and one is about maintaining a gap between towns. And I stress it is towns, not between villages or between different suburbs. It is maintaining a gap between towns. National planning policies require local authorities to focus their search for additional sites on areas that are well served by public transport or areas that have the potential to be well served by public transport. So that's been an important consideration in bringing these sites forward. So in terms of the proposed additional sites, there are 14 additional sites proposed across the city. 10 of those are solely for housing. One is a mixed-use site, the Handsworth Hall Farm site, which is a mixture of housing and employment. And there are 3 employment sites proposed in the northeast of the city near the motorway. Those sites provide capacity for an additional 3,948 homes approximately, and 67.35 hectares of employment land. So there is a small additional margin over and above that requested by the inspectors, but we think that's important to provide flexibility and to reduce the risk of the plan being rejected by the inspectors, because it is quite possible they could change boundaries or change capacities to some of the sites, which would mean there's a little margin in terms of meeting the inspectors' required levels of development. So if all the additional sites go forward, the total housing supply would be increased to almost 39,300 homes. Still over 80% of that development would be on brownfield sites. The total employment supply would be increased to just under 265 hectares. Again, over 70% of that would be on brownfield sites. So I'm sure some of you, or many of you, have seen the plan, the more detailed plans that were in the drop-in session. All this information is available in libraries and in the council's first point reception in the city centre. I won't go through the map in detail, but the sites in blue are the ones that were originally proposed in the plan that was submitted to the government in October 2023. And I say most of those are on brownfield sites. The additional sites are the sites shown in orange. So there's a cluster in the north of the city and a cluster in the south east, and some sites, one or two sites on the western side of the city as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the southeast of the city, there are two large, what we call strategic sites proposed at Handsworth Hall Farm and land off Beaver Hill Road. There were relatively few very large sites promoted to us, so there was a limited choice for us in promoting these sites, but they do provide an opportunity to deliver sort of planned communities with associated infrastructure, which is more difficult to do when you've got a scattering of smaller sites. So we do favour, in planning terms, delivering larger sites wherever possible. Next slide. So there's a further site sort of in the southeast of the city, which is off White Lane towards Gleadless Town End. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick overview of the sites. So I'm sure many of you have already submitted comments, but I just wanted to stress how you can have your say. There is a QR code there, which if you want to scan that, will take you to the relevant place on the council website. We also have leaflets with the QR code on as well, if you need any. We will also accept comments by email. I mean, obviously, we would encourage you to use the online consultation if you can, but we will accept email responses or postal responses as well, and our address is on the slide there. Next slide, please. Just to mention, there are 3 other consultation events planned across the city. So another one in the southeast planned at Handsworth Methodist Church at 4:30 to 8:30 next Monday. There's also one in the city centre running from 10 till 3 on Thursday the 26th of June. And there's a further event planned in the north of the city at Bright Homely Methodist Church. Yep, sorry. Yeah, we can put the slide up at the end as well if that's helpful. Everybody got that? Okay. So in terms of what happens next, all the comments that are submitted will be sent to the local planning inspectors. As I say, there are 3 inspectors considering the plan. They will read all the comments. They will then set agendas for the public hearings that will be starting in the week commencing 29th of September. Anybody who submitted comments and is seeking a change to the plan will be asked if they want to appear at the hearings. The programme officer, who's the person who liaises between the council and the inspectors, will get in touch with you if you've submitted comments. As I say, the inspectors will use the comments to decide which topics to discuss, and anyone who does want changes to the proposed sites can attend and ask to speak at the hearings. We then expect the inspectors to publish a preliminary report suggesting any changes needed to make the plan acceptable. This may or may not include the sites that we've been talking about today. So it's not decided yet. The inspectors will decide which sites should be included in the plan, if any. Once that stage has been completed and the inspectors have issued their preliminary report, that report will include main modifications, and there will be further consultation on those main modifications. We expect that to be early next year. The inspectors will then issue a final report in June 2026, and we would expect to adopt the plan around a month later. Thank you. that concludes what I wanted to say, Chair, so I'll hand back to you for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. I will. Are you ready, Scott? Good. Happy to take any questions that people have. A sea of hands. Scott will work his way down.
Hi there. So, as part of the new plan, you propose to introduce some greenbelt areas as well. I just wondered why that was the case, because it's significant brownfield sites. I just wondered, from a planning perspective, why do you think brownfield sites are not being developed?
I think I'll try and be brief with this. I think we touched on it in the. I'll come do the first part first. We touched on it in the presentation around the brownfield focus. I think I'll try not to be long-winded. The plan that was submitted essentially at that point in time, the government's position through its housing targets was that Sheffield needed to produce 53,000 homes, something like that. Through public consultation, the views that came back in terms of the approach that the council should take is that it shouldn't seek to deliver all of those homes if it resulted in greenbelt release. So the plan that was produced without any greenbelt release, which meant it needed a really, really strong focus on brownfield development in the urban area. So there's three sort of pillars to that, really. The first one is that there was a lot of work done in the city centre. To look at how many homes you could actually deliver there over a planned period. Part of that was, do you want to just tap your button and turn your microphone off? Is that okay?
Oh.
Thank you. So that work produced a capacity in the city centre that rose from 10,000 to 18,000. So the plan moved forward based on a capacity in the central area of 18,000 homes. The other two things, as my colleagues sort of touched on, one is we looked at how we can maximise the urban area in the sense of allocating as many sites that have been promoted to us in the urban area as possible. We also then looked at what we felt we could produce in terms of a windfall allowance. And a windfall allowance in the urban area is essentially land that you've not identified yet that will come forward over that 17-year period for development. So it will come out of the blue, essentially. And you can do things to make that happen as well. But we put forward a figure of about 7,700 homes over that period of time that we anticipated, principally coming forward on brownfield land in the urban area that we couldn't identify at this point, which was accepted during the examination. So essentially we found ourselves at a point in the examination where we felt, in the context that the examination is public and evidence-based, that there wasn't really anything we were left to put on the table in terms of delivery of brownfield sites in the urban area over the planned period. When you take into account anything that comes forward that isn't allocated or proposed to be allocated on brownfield land will fall into that category of windfall. And that's where we found ourselves really in terms of the plan that we produced. And when we've been asked to find this additional land, essentially going through those steps and talking to our neighbours to see if they can help, to us it feels like the only option really available to us now is to look at Greenfield, Greenbelt. There's a second part to your question. Do you want to just repeat that for me? Is that okay?
See, I've got quite a different view in actual fact. I think brownfield sites can be developed if the council works with the developers to actually make that happen. In my experience, I mean, certainly building on brownfield site, it costs a lot of money. Often, you know, you have to prime pump the site. There's contamination, remediation works to do, enabling works. It costs a lot more money. Now, developers, they've got to be able to sell that, property at the end and make a profit. And often they can't do that. I think one of the reasons really is that the council are not encouraging brownfield development. And I think also as well there's quite onerous Section 106 agreements that prevent development. I think it would be far better to target those areas and look what the council could do in partnership with some developers so we can actually start developing these brownfield sites. Otherwise, they'll just sit there forever. You've got to give developers an opportunity and incentive to actually develop brownfield. And that needs to come from the council really as well. It does.
I couldn't agree more. I think A few things just to touch on there. I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, one of the things when we're talking about upping the city centre capacity, part of that is looking at actually what we can deliver in the city centre on brownfield sites. I think it's been touched on already. The plan that was produced, sort of 80% of the land in the plan that would be developed was brownfield. So there's a real strong focus in the plan around brownfield and how you deliver it. And you're quite right, it's not easy to deliver. A lot of the land's dirty and contaminated. There's a couple of things, I guess. One is that there's some good examples at the moment of the work that's been going on over the last couple of years, not just by the councils but by partners as well around, particularly Furness Hill and Neep Centre, the obvious one. There's some stuff going on at Moreford. There's other bits around the city as well where there is regeneration plans, quite a lot of work with Homes England as well to get some of this brownfield stuff off the ground. There's £67 million of government money going into, I think, about 1,300 homes at Furness and Neep Centre to extend Kelham essentially and create some new communities down there. So there's quite a lot of plans and quite a lot of work to try to make that happen, and that's just focusing on the city centre. We've got space in the ground at Attercliffe, which is something that they've been trying to do for years. So there's some really good news stories out there in the city around delivering on brownfield land, and it's really difficult this because it's kind of we're sitting here talking about Greenfield Greenbelt when we've spent the last sort of 3 or 4 years of our professional lives trying to put forward and deliver a plan that didn't deliver Greenfield Greenbelt. So it's difficult for us to sort of sit in these seats now and try to convince you that Greenfield Greenbelt's the right way to do it. I guess what the presentation picked up is, aside from what I've said, and take it as you will, around how hard we've pressed to try to maximise brownfield, the position that we're in is that because we feel professionally we've maximised brownfield in the context of an evidence-based examination that we have to present to, actually the choices that we've got left now are really withdraw the plan and then have to start again, and there will be a higher ask on Greenbelt in that context because it's a new plan over a long period, or find a solution to the challenge that we've been given now. I think just the other thing just to touch on around viability and brownfield is that one thing the plan has got is something called a whole plan viability assessment, a WUPVAL. And what that does is it looks at typologies across the city, and it looks at what sites, theoretically at least, because it's a broad evidence-based document, but what sites can stomach from a Section 106 point of view and community infrastructure levy point of view before you tip that balance on viability. So one thing a plan does is it resets the bar around viability on some of those sites and what they should be contributing versus what it takes to keep those sites viable to deliver. But that's not making light of actually how challenging it is to deliver these brownfield sites. It is very hard.
This is it from the plan, is the council's input to make these brownfield sites become live. And that's not captured in the plan anywhere, is it really?
The plan is the foundation. So there's a lot of work that's going on. I've touched on some of it. There's a lot of work that's going on, not just by the council, but the council's partners as well. And developers, the private sector. There's a lot of work going on. It takes time, of course, to deliver. But without the structural framework of a local plan, it makes it so much harder. And it's why a plan's so important. We've got partners like Homes England. They are more likely to come to town. The government's more likely to come to town with money to help do that if you have got the right structure and evidence base in front of you. And the pillar to that is a local plan.
Can I just add a point on that? It's to say Sheffield's been extremely successful in building on brownfield sites over the last 20 years. Over 90% of the homes built every year in Sheffield over the last 20 years have been on brownfield sites. But that has meant, a lot of the brownfield supply has been used up. There is still plenty out there, and the plan is focused on developing that remaining supply of brownfield sites. 80% of it will still be on brownfield sites, even if all these additional sites go forward as we've proposed. And the inspector spent a lot of time last year scrutinising the evidence we've presented on brownfield sites. And the majority of those, they were convinced, are going to be deliverable, are going to be economically viable during the plan period. There were a few which they said they don't think they're going to come forward, or that they weren't convinced that there was evidence to support them. But they have made this very large windfall allowance, which is nearly 3 years' worth of land supply, nearly 7,700 homes, which is these windfall sites which are not allocated, which are sites which will just come forward as planning applications. And as Mike says, there is a huge amount of the majority of sites that are brought forward by the private sector. The council is doing an awful lot of work, particularly in the city centre, to free up land to assemble sites and bring forward development within the central area. But it can't do everything, and the private sector has been very successful in bringing forward sites right across Sheffield.
Yeah, I'm going to move on at that point and just say to people, I appreciate it is a complicated issue, but we may have a lot of questions, so I hope we can be as brief as we can be, please, because I think otherwise you'll lose a lot of the audience. Who's next?
Oh, Scott, where's Scott?
Oh, Scott gone.
Come on.
Again. I love planning. Got my PhD at University of Sheffield. Right then. When I was doing my PhD, I come across Professor not Matt Flinders, Danny Dorling. I'm sure you know that he wrote about the tale of two cities. Like Sheffield is one of the most divided cities between rich and poor in country. There are more people with PhDs living in Walkley than anywhere else in the country. There's a reason for that. It's because you've got 2 hospitals, you've got all universities. Now, if you're going to build houses in this side of Sheffield, Sheffield Hallam University is just selling off all its collegiate round Nether Edge. Is there any way that we could leverage Sheffield Hallam University to build something in the southeast of Sheffield? Because I mentioned before we don't have any A-level provision in this side of Sheffield. Is there any chance that we could leverage to get the university to build something in this side? Because if you build it in this side, the people who are going to do the jobs in that, they'll live here. Yeah, and it'll stop that divide. Yeah, this is a poor area. South East Sheffield is peasants. They might own their houses, but they're not worth much. You know what I mean? Other side of Sheffield, my fiancée lives in a £3.5 million house in flipping forward, right? So, can we just try? I'll shut up now, but can we just try? Yeah?
Can I come in on that one? I think you make a really, really good point there, and I think some of the concern that we've heard from residents in this part of Sheffield has been, we're concerned about the number of homes, but we're actually concerned about the point that you just made there around jobs and actually driving some of that inequality out of the city. I guess one of the things I think we can be positive about is, and you mentioned the universities, you mentioned Hallam and the university, is that, not too far from here over on the AMRC and as part of Sheffield Runway Park, which is the University of Sheffield's new development, there are proposals being designed for this part of South East Sheffield. So, admittedly, some of it's just over the border in Rotherham, but a large proportion of it does sit within the Sheffield boundary. And one of the things that we're talking about here is actually delivering opportunities for communities which are, in their neighbourhood, close by, within an easy journey time. So when you talk about leverage, it's difficult to be able to pin that down. But one of the things we have done alongside the emergence of this draft local plan is that the council has adopted a 10-year growth strategy. And one of the things that growth strategy does is it ties in what commitments we're going to secure from the university sector. It secures obligations from the private sector in terms of the Sheffield Property Association and other partners that are well placed to be able to deliver those opportunities that you talk about. So when it comes to the local plan, yes, we do make provision for education uses, further education uses within the plan, and you'll see that in the plan making. But actually, in terms of leveraging those opportunities, there are proposals underway now. In fact, we were at a conference probably 3 weeks ago where the university was launching a brand new development proposal just over the border on Runway Park. So actually, these things are coming from the universities now that they're seeing a bit more certainty in the plan-making process.
I was just going to say before we move on behalf of all councillors across this table, we have pursued for the last 2 years the Education Department about the lack of sixth form provision in the South East, and that is an issue. We all divide about different things, but that is an issue which we are not divided about, and we have pursued that vigorously, and we will continue to do so, because I cannot see how you. I get all the point about the universities and so on, but we would like proper sixth form provision in the South East.
Bishop.
Thank you. I'm a member of Friends of Shirtcliffe, which some of you may know is a designated ancient woodland site, the boundary of which joins the site that you call SES 30, but we call the Bramley and Beaver Hill Greenbelt. We're very concerned at Friends of Shirtcliffe about that border with this proposed development, and we actually don't believe that any buffer area is safe for Shirtcliffe woodland. Furthermore, there is an area on SES 30 which is designated GM 26205, which is open space. I understand that only in exceptional circumstances can that be changed. In that area, GM 26205, there's an absolute treasure trove of wildlife. Birds, nesting buzzards, ancient trees, we've got everything down there at the tip of what is a wildlife corridor which then extends into Shirtcliffe. I would like to ask you, what are the exceptional circumstances that you believe that losing 3% of the green belt in Sheffield will result in the South East losing at least 90% of its green belt? And furthermore, I've just been told in the drop-in planning that there are plans to make an inroad at the bottom of the houses on Beaver Drive, which is directly on the designated area, GM 26205. What are those exceptional circumstances?
So it's not necessarily the case that you have to demonstrate exceptional circumstances for release of open space. You do need to demonstrate exceptional circumstances to release greenbelt for development. So the inspectors have, I suppose, have hinted at the fact that they think at a strategic level exceptional circumstances could exist to release greenbelt land across the city as a whole. And that's based on the evidence they've already heard about land supply and overall need for development across the city. They will obviously want to look at individual sites and whether the exceptional circumstances exist for individual sites. And they will take into account factors such as ecology, access, infrastructure. You know, those are all valid considerations, and we would obviously urge people to make comments about those factors as part of this consultation. In terms of how the site would actually be accessed, that's not been determined yet. We think we know that it would need to come off for the NES 30 Beaver Hill Road side. It would need to come off Beaver Hill Road and come through the bit of green space that you talk about. But it's not yet determined in terms of exactly how much green space within the site would be retained. It may well be the case that the majority of that part of the site is retained as open space as part of the layout of the development. So if these proposals go through, if they're supported by the inspectors, there would be another master planning stage further down the line, but even before a planning application is submitted. And at that point, we could work out exactly which parts of the site need to be protected as open space, which parts of the site need to be buffers to protect the local wildlife site to the south. We have taken advice from the Ecology Service about what an appropriate width of buffer should be based on the habitats within the Shirtcliffe Valley. So we are aware of that, and we have indicated that buffers will be required. The inspectors will look at all these factors and will come to a view about whether the site is suitable. They might change the capacity of the site, they might alter the boundaries, they might indicate that additional conditions should be applied to the allocation. So that it's still all up for debate in terms of how these sites would be developed.
Then the damage would already be done, even if there was an amendment to the proposed area. Also got the Finchwell site on. And you will see that what we're going to be left with there is nothing but urban sprawl, which is what you're telling us you're trying to avoid. I think you're wrong.
Next question.
Oh. Hello, my name is Michael Parkin. I live on Hall Road at the top of Handsworth. Yes, I understand we need a plan. Yes, I understand we need houses. Yes, I understand that large sites are difficult to come by. My concern is that we've got two large sites in very close proximity to one another that both delivering 1,700 houses to this area. This area has already got problems with traffic, school places, dentists, doctors, like all the rest of the city. And adding 1,700 houses in such a small area is a bit of a problem. And on top of that, we don't only have 1,700 houses being added, just across the road, Highfield Road, we have another 2,200 houses that are going to be delivered to Waverley, taking its capacity to 4,000 houses. On top of that, we've got SES 28 down the road, which is 258 houses. When you add all that together, what's going to be developed, that's over 4,200 houses, plus ad hoc development's going to take it up to more than that. That's a lot of houses for this area to cope with and absorb, and for all the infrastructure to cope with as well. I've looked at some of the traffic planning documents about what's going to change with respect to traffic management, and the only thing that it says in there is there's going to be a pair of traffic lights at the bottom of Beaverhill Road and Retford Road. That's it. That's not good enough, given the amount of scale of development that's going to happen in this very small area.
So just on the point of traffic, we've done a transport assessment which has looked at the cumulative impact of development sites right across the city, and that's looked at the levels of traffic that would expect to be generated by the different types of development. And that's concluded that the only junction where mitigation is needed is the junction that you mentioned between Retford Road and Beaverhill Road. Now, what I would say is that's a high-level assessment. There will be a further detailed transport assessment when a planning application is submitted, and that might point to further changes to junctions that are needed at that point. In terms of other infrastructure, we've consulted with obviously the Education Service. We've also consulted with the Integrated Care Board, and they've indicated that yes, there will be a need for additional doctors' consulting rooms within the area, and we need to work with them to look at how those are delivered. And it may well be that the developer has to provide a financial contribution towards some of the infrastructure in the area. There's also the developers have to pay the community infrastructure levy, which pays for infrastructure that's needed to support these important sites. So there are a number of ways that additional infrastructure can be funded, and our investigations so far think that the problems can be overcome.
So how will these developments improve the quality of life for Handsworth residents?
I think there's always I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be perfect. There's a balance here. But I guess, I'll take them one at a time. I'll come back to that question. Let me just answer that first question, then I'll come back to that point. I think, in terms of the word's compromise, really, which feels like a difficult word. I get that. I'm already dealing with two, if that's okay. One thing that they will deliver is more choice around homes, affordable housing. We've touched on the potential for infrastructure improvements, but so there's a balance, because we're certainly not sitting here and saying that it won't come without issues and sacrifice and impact on community, because of course it will. And in terms of the gentleman at the back, in terms of what we should do and why don't we tell the government no, that takes us back to the sort of the presentation, really, in the gentleman's question at the beginning, which is it wasn't quite this question, but the sort of the consequences of not finding this land. And the consequences of not finding this land is not having a plan. And ultimately, not having a plan. And it's difficult, this, because this sort of moves us away to an extent around the growth in this area, which is what we're here to talk about. So don't mishear this. But the challenge of not having a plan means that actually there is no strategy for the city, and if there's no strategy for the city will suffer as a consequence. The other implication of that is we ultimately will need a plan. We've been trying to do this since 1998 in terms of a spatial plan, and we've not succeeded. And all we'll be told to do is start again. And the thing we'll need to do in that circumstance is find more land, because we're looking to a further period into the future. More of the brownfield sites will have been used up, and we'll find ourselves, maybe not in this room talking about these sites, albeit there's a strong potential that we would be, but we will find ourselves in similar rooms in different parts of the city as well, talking about other sites. Chair, I'll pass back to you.
Sorry, I do want to bring lots of people in. I know there's a couple at the front here who've been quite patient.
Yeah,
you've got a list, that's fine.
Yeah, but they've been...
Okay.
Can you hold it, mate?
Yes.
Okay, I want to try and get everybody in, so while I appreciate feelings and...
This couple here, Scott.
Hello, can I read the question that I read on Friday, please, at the meeting? The area that Sue Smelter's just mentioned, that backs onto Beaver Drive, this road on Beaver Hill has flooded time after time, year after year, causing the area to be cut off for days, inaccessible from Handsworth to Woodhouse. If this proposed adjacent area, that is the area Sue's mentioned with all the wildlife on and ancient trees, was to be built on, the runoff of the surface water would be greater increase in flood risk. My questions are, how do you think 868 houses and a secondary school are going to affect the future flooding on this category 2/3 flood zone area that we have got maps to prove this? Where is the water going to go, and how will the sewerage works cope, as the sewerage system at Woodhouse Mill already can't cope? It floods into the River Rother and Sharecliffe Brook, which is a protected woodland. Has all this been reviewed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes is the answer in terms of technical work around flooding on the site. As part of the infrastructure delivery plan as well, we've spoken to Yorkshire Water around challenges, not just on this site, but other sites in terms of flooding from wastewater. And we are aware that there are issues on several of the Greenbelt sites in relation to that, and sewerage flooding further down the network, and surface water runoff on the sites. So part of the technical work that's already gone on, and part of the technical work as the sites come forward to be delivered, we'll be looking at those runoff rates. And you've got to remember, on quite a lot of these sites, there'll be a significant part of undeveloped land. So there'll be opportunities for drainage strategies to be delivered as part of delivering the sites, which will mean that we can control, probably improve surface water runoff. You can't build on flood zone 3B, which is functional floodplain. Again, in terms of these particular sites, because of the scale of them, if there is any flood zone 3A or 2, which are higher risk flood areas, then given the nature of the sites, then again you could quite comfortably put them in the non-developable areas. So you can actually do things on these sites to help improve flood management potentially.
Do I have to hold something? Hello? Oh, right, it's working. So I've got a couple of questions. One relates to the new development in Charnock. My concern, and I only found out any of this was happening a few days ago, so I don't know if you've already had a meeting for that area. But my concern is there's a lot of wildlife adjacent to Charnock. We regularly see beavers,
foxes, and there are deer living in Charnock Woods. Now you're going to develop, and I don't know whether that's brownfield, because it used to be an old aerodrome, but the animals don't know that, and they happily live there. You're going to develop all that. I don't know how many houses that is, and then there's a proposal to put another 350 adjacent to White Lane. So that's both sides of where Charnock Woods and all that wildlife is. So the impact on that wildlife is going to be huge. If somebody can tell me if there's a campaign group, because I understand there's a campaign group for Woodhouse, if there's one for my area, if anybody knows, if there's anybody I can get in touch with, I'd like to be involved. So that's just my question to do with that. And the other question, when I was listening to your presentation and you said the government have said Sheffield's got to build X number of houses, 59,000 or something. I wondered who these inspectors are, because I actually really felt for you planners when you were talking about that, and I can see that you've tried your best within your instructions to develop a plan that's least bad for Sheffield. But it's like a gun is being held to your heads. You're being told either you come up with a plan or you will be forced to have a worse plan. And I think that is outrageous. I thought we lived in a democracy. So, so is there any way that Sheffield can show or, I don't know, write an email of complaint to the government and say, we have tried our best. We our local people are up in arms against the development of green belt. We're a city, our limits are the city limits, and we cannot accommodate that number of people extra living in Sheffield. Just at least tell them that. Oh, and who are these inspectors? Three people who are going to decide our fate.
So, could I just interrupt you for a second? Obviously, I appreciate what you're saying, but if everybody goes on at great length, and I say that both to officers and to members of the public, we might not get round everybody. But in relation to the question of inspectors, they are appointed by the government. In fact, these inspectors were appointed by the previous government, because the plan then was... So the government inspectors are appointed by government, not, in a sense, a political appointment. So it is up to them how they then proceed. They were in fact appointed by the previous government. So you know, that question. Yes.
I don't think any of us have got any faith in governments or councils anymore. And with everything going on in this country, it's no good saying that they're appointed. We've lost trust with officials. Public officials have let down this country for too long, and it's not acceptable.
In terms of the ladies' questions, so Chair's already mentioned it, but the planning inspectors work for the planning inspectorate, who are independent. They report to MHCLG, but they sit as an independent arm to examine plans. I guess the thing to reflect on there is that gun to our head is a tricky phrase, I think, in the sense that the inspectors have come to the view that the plan that was submitted to them on behalf of Sheffield, which didn't give them 52,000 homes, but did propose 34, actually is broadly okay. And we've got a challenge here around some additional land, but I'm not trying to defend them. I guess what I'm saying is actually they've demonstrated their independence in some senses, because the government figure that we should be hitting based on the plan that we were asked to produce was 51 or 52,000. They like to change that number slightly every time I say it. Low 50,000s, and the inspectors have come back and said around about 38,000 is a sensible number. I should just say, and forgive me, Chair, we don't disagree with what the inspectors have said in terms of their logic. If you set aside the fact the consequences of that is Greenbelt release, actually what they've said is you put so many houses in your city centre a lot of them will be apartments in terms of the stock that you're going to be producing, and therefore you need to broaden out your housing mix. The other thing that they've said, again, is what the gentleman touched on at the beginning, which is a lot of the sites you deliver in are brownfield sites and they're dirty and they're hard to get off the ground. We're doing a lot around that, but fundamentally that is going to limit your ability to deliver affordable housing for the people of Sheffield as well. So actually the logic in terms of what the inspectors have applied to get us to the position that we're challenged with is actually pretty fundamentally sound. From my professional opinion, in terms of the White Lane site, in terms of nature, because obviously nature is not unique to that site, a lot of the Greenbelt sites we're looking at are pretty special in that sense, including the ones that we've not put forward. At high level, what we've done straight away is you've taken out the local wildlife sites, the ancient woodland and different things like that as non-developable. There will be more detailed ecological studies on these sites to see what is actually on them and therefore what is the best way to accommodate some of that nature on the site, but at the same time, fundamentally, understand how you can deliver these sites in a way that's as sympathetic as you can be to the nature that exists on them. But there will be some consequences to that, and we wouldn't pretend that there won't.
Well, I'm trying to understand this process and finding out that the last time we had a local plan was in 1998, so we haven't really had one, current one, for 27 years. You thought you had a plan and it came back in February of this year, where the government asked for more houses. And up to then, everybody prided themselves in Sheffield, you know, having green belt and being a green city. But after February of this year, all of a sudden, you decided to give up, although you pride yourself on only giving up 3% of the green belt, over 90% of that is in S13. Can you explain how you came to that decision, please?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the distribution of sites that we've proposed, they reflect the sites that were promoted to us. I think in the presentation I said there were just over 100 sites that were promoted to the council through the local plan process at various stages. From those 100 sites, we've tried to focus first and foremost on the large strategic sites that are in the most sustainable locations. And it just happens that 2 of those are within S13. There's another large one in the north of the city as well. So we think these represent the most sustainable sites. Undoubtedly, you know, if you were starting the process again, people would put forward other sites, but that's not the stage we're at in this process. We need to get this plan adopted as quickly as possible to ensure that the city has the right policies in place to provide good development in Sheffield going forward.
No. One at a time. Scott, can I ask you to bring to these 2 people at the front, because actually they were the first to put their hands up.
No, they've had their hands up longer than anybody.
So I'd just like them to give that opportunity.
Go on, you'll go first.
Okay. Where do you talk?
You just talk.
I just want to ask, how have we come to this in Sheffield? How has this happened? Why have we must have been neglectful in some way. I mean, look at Gleedless Valley. The people in there were told that those houses were going to be whatever, they were going to do them up, weren't they, and let people live there. Because they are full of damp and all sorts of things. But that plan's been stopped twice. There are people in there who've been trying to get somewhere to rent, thinking that you're going to come in or somebody's going to come in and sort them out, and it's not happened, and twice that has been put on hold. But what's wrong with those houses? There's bloody hundreds of them. Why have they just left them to rot like that?
They're empty as well. There's a lot empty. Just drive down Main Road and there's empty flats everywhere. Surely the council has got the powers to say, that house is empty. If you're not going to do it up and let somebody in it, we will. That's got to be cheaper than building a new one.
It's just a disgrace doing that, I think. but that's what you do, isn't it?
Sorry, so, Chair, I just go back to the previous lady. Apologies. We're not aware of a campaign group in and around the White Lane site. I forgot to answer that, so sorry. In terms of existing, and it's a question that we've been asked a few times when we've obviously been at different events, in terms of existing stock and sort of stock that perhaps has reached end of life in some circumstances. So there is an allowance in terms of the plan's target for demolished houses. So we have to take that into account. A lot of the vacant properties or the vacant properties, I should say, are counted as existing stock. So they're counted within the numbers that exist as stock, housing stock within Sheffield. There are, in terms of, nobody lives, are we talking about Gleadless Valley? The people do live in Gleadless Valley. There's some empty properties there, there's empty properties in other places. There's a lot of people that live in Gleadless Valley. Well, we shouldn't let's not get into a debate about how many homes are empty in Gleadless Valley. It's certainly not a desolate place. I mean, the Gleadless Valley, sorry, stop, if you don't mind. Do you want to pick up? No, you go for it, mate.
Just in terms of Gleadless Valley, I mean, I can sort of outline a bit about what the council is doing. That might help to I guess, give you some assurance that the council is looking at that seriously. I accept your point that actually, historically, there have been a couple of master plans led out of housing that have looked at deploying funds there to renovate those homes. What's happened now is that there's been an independent chair appointed for Gleadless Valley, there's been a proper regeneration board, and there is a new programme of investment happening in Gleadless Valley. I guess to address some of your concerns, one of the things that I think we need to accept is that some of those homes are coming to the end of their life, but others can be invested in to be renovated. One of the problems that the council is wrestling with is around retrofit, so making those homes environmentally sustainable for the future. They might be leaky, they might be cold, the boilers might not function properly. So that takes a huge amount of money. The council is applying to government for support for there. So there is a programme around Gleadless Valley, I guess, to just pick up on your points around the need to maximise our own existing housing stock.
Next. Okay. So.
Hiya. Done a bit of research on what's happening in Charnock. We're going to build all these 600 new homes. In the last 10 months, we've lost water supply 10 times. We've had sewage leaks into all the major streams and everything around. I've got this documented if you want to read it.
They
They can't keep the water flowing. So what are they going to do with another 600 houses?
They'll not be able to do it. And you talk of Yorkshire Water, you're also dealing with the
Severn Trent,
and they're really bad.
And the system was upgraded some years ago, supposed to be future-proofed. And ever since they future-proofed it, we've had nothing but problems. It's been even worse.
And he's the man that agreed to take an email from them every time
and I spread it round
the water went out, and that he would send it round to everybody. So why he did that, I don't know.
Get insurance when you've got to declare it's built on an area that's got previous flooding.
I think. Chair, I think in terms of, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because it feels like an answer we've given. It's not going to be satisfactory, but we do work with the infrastructure providers, and we will continue to do that through this strategic stage of plan making, but also in terms of detailed planning application and infrastructure challenges and infrastructure provision. So all we can say is that we do and will continue to work with different infrastructure providers to understand the pressures and the challenges that exist and what the additional growth will result in. And we will do that in a way that gives us the best chance possible to get the right infrastructure.
When you get the text at 6 o'clock in the
And again, that they are the conversations we're having at the moment with the providers around.
Severn Trent is even worse than Sheffield, because it all seems to be around Severn Trent. It's the farthest point of the area. It used to be Chesterfield. Unfortunately, Sheffield took it over, and we've got Sheffield problems now, because Severn Trent.
I'm not sure that's a question that, to be fair, the planners there can answer. I'm sure public confidence in the water companies is not very high, and I share that.
How are you going to maintain the 600 houses you're building of basic water supply?
I think that's a point I think that's a point you can make to the inspectors. I mean, let me just say to people, one of the things I want you to get out tonight is, in the end now, this is going to be in the hands of inspectors, and I hope that people will go away and make, and a number of people have made very good points, which are matters that the inspectors can look at, and I urge you to do that. Myself and Councillor Crossland spoke at a previous hearing on the local plan, so we're happy to help you in that respect. I'm sure other councillors are as well.
The local schools, the 30%
Yeah.
don't subscribe.
Yeah, I do get.
It's in a terrible state.
Yeah, I do get all that. I'm saying to you that those are matters that you can raise with the inspectors and should. And we'd like to help you to make your case to the inspectors. And I certainly spent, Councillor Crossland and I, along with the MP, to be fair, we've non-partisan about this, with the inspectors on the issue of Eckington Way. So I am, speaking from some experience with this. And, so I urge you to think about those things. Next question.
Yeah. So I'm just following on from the gentleman on the back. Who touched on health of the local population. And obviously that's when I just got my hand up, so I'm just following up from that. And just a quote from the planners over there, it said we need to compromise. So what are the anticipated risks to the public health of this side of the city and the healthcare inequalities between the east and the west side? What are the mitigations you're proposing to address these?
Yeah, okay, we'll come to you in a moment, but let the...
I think in terms of... ask me the question again.
So, we've touched on the health of the local population, and to quote the planners over there, we in this room need to compromise. So what are the anticipated risks to public health and healthcare inequalities between the east and the west side of the city? What mitigations are you proposing to address these?
And I think mitigation is the right word. So, the things that jump out straight away in terms of not necessarily east versus west, but certainly implications of site release.
The first part of the question, though, was what are the risks?
Yeah, if you let me answer. So, in terms of risks, I suppose, of new developments, so you've obviously got loss of open spaces that exist at the moment. So part of that mitigation is looking at how new open space can be provided, existing open space can be improved. You look at potential risks around air quality because you've got more vehicles on the road, etc. And again, part of that is looking at infrastructure to make sure, and colleagues touched on it already, around looking at sites that actually have got access to the better infrastructure in the city. But that doesn't mean that the risk isn't increased. So looking at sort of infrastructure pressures and looking at how they could be mitigated, the impact on the roads and how they can continue to flow. They're not easy things, of course, but that is the potential impact and the potential risk associated with that. You've then got pressure on existing sort of infrastructure, health, schools, etc. And again, a lot of this is about understanding where those infrastructure pressures will come and looking at actually what the opportunity is with existing providers to be able to manage and deal with that in a way that is at least neutral, if not an improvement. But they're probably the challenges and the way that you would look to try to mitigate those challenges. I'm sure there are several more, but they're the ones that spring to mind immediately. I'm just going to bring Will in as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think you referenced Mike touching on compromise there, and I think clearly there's lots of strong public opinion in the room around, you know, the proposals that we've put before you today. And I think you've seen on the presentation that that's not been an easy thing to arrive at. I guess the other bit is that we frequently, through speaking with members, but also through direct approaches, hear from people in Sheffield that don't have access to housing, that are living in overcrowded accommodation, or where, you know, sons and daughters are living with parents because they can't get on the housing ladder because there isn't enough homes. So this isn't an easy thing, but I think, you know, what we would hear from other people is, yeah, we do need more homes in the city. We need homes that are affordable. And actually, the Greenbelt propositions that we are talking about tonight and before you do allow us, through government guidelines, to push harder on affordable homes than those sites on brownfield land. So when we talk about compromise, I admit that's a difficult word to use. I think we accept that. You know, this isn't an easy conversation, and you know, everything in Sheffield is going to have to be, you know, it's right that we have debates like this, and that's why it's important, as the Chair said, that we hear from you, and please do submit your information to the inspectors. But we also have to acknowledge that the inspectors have said we need to provide these homes for the city. You know, we've got people living in an accommodation that is overcrowded. They need more choice. They want to be able to get on in their own lives as well. So, you know, that's just, when we talk about compromise, I guess it's just an element of putting the other side to that debate.
I think that's fair enough, and you've answered the question. But I guess it's just, for us sat in the room, it's very difficult to hear compromise when there may be a 10-year difference in life expectancy from this side of the city to the other. And I think that's So, just as a follow-up question, because I think it does sound like you're trying to support us and you are trying to work with us. If you are supporting these residents in the room today, can you inform us what you think the biggest risks are of this proposal for being approved by the government inspectors?
I don't quite understand the question. Can you phrase it slightly differently?
So, what do you think the biggest risks are for when this is going to be reviewed by the government inspectors? What are the biggest risks that you think they will come back with and say these sites aren't acceptable?
So, I mean, ultimately, what they will do is review the evidence base, and I mean, there's technical legal things that they'll look at as well. But I think principally they will look at the evidence that we have put together, including sort of the sustainability appraisal, the planning appraisal, and look at what residents and businesses and the land promoters as well, because there'll be land promoters who are seeking to reinforce our position, there'll be land promoters who are seeking to promote their own sites. So there'll be a lot of different stakeholders coming to the inspectors with their points of view. The inspectors will be looking for what we know as material planning considerations, and we sort of touched on some of that already around air quality, concentration of development in one part of the city, just thinking of the conversations we've had tonight and the pressure that puts on infrastructure, implications for nature, flooding, you know, it's those types of things, those fundamental planning considerations the inspectors will be looking at, and they'll be checking our work to make sure that we've looked at that properly and satisfied themselves that we've come to the right conclusions, and they'll be looking at other things that are submitted as well and coming to the same views. So they will want to facilitate that debate. They'll want to facilitate that debate across all of the sites in the city. The other thing to say, just for absolute completeness, is from a legal compliance point of view, there are legal elements that you need to produce for a sustainability appraisal. We've got one through our integrated impact assessment, habitat regulation assessments. There's a lot of legal framework there that needs to be satisfied as well. So they'll be testing that legal framework as well. But yeah, a lot of what the focus should be on is really key material planning considerations and your view on them versus our view, because this is a balance, and we've touched on this in the different parts of the city we've been in, which is that there is no perfect site. There's no great site here. Every site's got compromise, and the choices that have been made based on our view as to what the right compromise, using that word again, but the right compromise is in terms of the positives and the negatives of the different sides. And that is judgment, and that's what's really important to note, that they're judgments that we've reached, the judgment that elected members have reached in supporting the proposals, and ultimately they're judgments that you as the general public and other stakeholders will want to reach your conclusions on for that debate to be facilitated through the examination.
I just wanted to pick up on a few things that have been said already. I may be repeating myself, but what people have said. But going back to sort of why these areas, I was at the S13 meeting on Friday, and I think all the people in S13 are really upset about S13's Greenbelt being the majority of the land that's being used. And I'm sure that anybody on the council could accept that. We did agree that there should be some housing built. We weren't saying nothing should be built in S13. We felt that everywhere should take their share. The main point that came out, though, and I'm speaking for somebody who was on the panel then, who did say, and this could be wrong, that there were 16 areas in the west that are Greenbelt, and you said that, obviously, you came to the agreement that they weren't sustainable as much as the S13 ones, but there were 16 in the west, and of course the west won't want them there for obvious reasons. And also in S13, in South East Sheffield, we've got the worst air pollution in a lot of the city compared to the west. South-west prevailing winds come across in every city. The South East is the worst. And we're now talking about building the majority of these houses in S13. There's going to be virtually no green belt left in S13. And surely, as council members and councillors and town planners or whatever, you can surely sympathise and agree with S13 residents that we're not going to lay down and roll over and just accept it, whether people thought we would. It really is truly unfair on Sheffield 13 that 90% of the green belt should go. And I don't think people are willing to accept that.
Can I just check, Scott, how many people have we now got on to ask a question? We're booked till half past 8, so I just want to check that we can take fairly short, 6 more. Can please people be fairly short, and also in terms of answers, because sorry, I keep saying that to you, Michael, but, you know, please curb your Sir Humphrey tendencies, and please.
I think in terms of the question around the south-west of the city, there were a collection of sites, and I guess I won't touch on that too much other than to say that those sites are available in the public documentations that's been produced as part of the consultation, so they're not hidden sites. That the sites that we looked at in all parts of the city are there, along with appraisals as to why the conclusion was reached that they weren't appropriate sites. I think certainly we do sympathise for what it's worth, not just with S13, but in the different parts of the city in the northwest, there's quite a concentration of development there as well. So, and again, just for the sake of it, we've spent the last 3.5 years of our professional lives trying to deliver a plan that doesn't release Greenfield Greenbelt. So it's quite challenging for us to sit in front of you now, making the case to do something that we've been trying to make the case not to do for the last 3 years. I'll pass to Simon just to pick up on air quality.
Were you from there? You lot from Sheffield, guys. Sorry, go from Sheffield, fellas.
Sorry, can we not do this? We've got 6 more questions. I'd like the questions to be heard. Can we please?
Yeah, so just very briefly on air quality. The whole of Sheffield is an air quality management area. The council's strategy around air quality is very much around trying to get people to use public transport and walk and cycle more, to get out of private vehicles. We are seeing improvements in air quality across the city as a whole, partly as a result of the policies that that have been brought in around travel.
It's absolutely shocking. The traffic in city centre is horrendous.
Sorry, excuse me. I did say, can we please conduct ourselves properly? I understand the depth of feeling, and
What you keep doing here is closing people down when you're giving your feedback. Embrace it, take it on the chin, and listen and learn from what people.
Excuse me. I voted against this plan, so actually I'm on your side. But we do need to hear from everybody. And if everybody starts shouting and carrying on, I want everybody to have the right to speak, not just one person continually speak several times. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roxanne Miles. I just want to say every piece of Greenbelt is ranked out of 20. The Greenbelt in S13 is ranked between 13 and 14, which makes it moderate to strong. Now, there are other places in the city that have lower rankings than that. So why is such a large proportion of housing, a disproportionate proportion of housing, being dumped in this particular borough? You talk about compromise and balance, but it is wholly disproportionate and is going to ruin the village and this town. And it's just unbelievably unfair. I want to tell you one thing. Now, there is a particular case, a High Court case. It's between Calverton Parish Council versus Nottingham City Council. 2015 was the year. The case number is 1078. Now, that established a 5-stage test for exceptional circumstances. You cannot simply say a blanket term, there's exceptional circumstances. You have to go through a 5-stage test to prove it for each individual site. Can you tell us if this has been done?
I think just in terms of the 2 points, I think the latter point is we're not familiar with that case, and we can go away and take a look at it, but we can't respond to that today. In terms of the Greenbelt scores, that's fully acknowledged. I think it's acknowledged in the various sort of reports to council committees. That was one of 3 considerations we looked at. Sustainability appraisals, so relative sustainability of the sites in terms of their locations, and planning appraisals around the sort of the constraints of the sites were considered. There are some sites, you're right, that we're proposing to allocate that have got higher Greenbelt scores. They are sites that are considered to be more sustainable. So the whole approach was around a balance, a review of a number of considerations, and it's got to be acknowledged, and I've already said it once, that there was no perfect site. There's no great site. All the sites have compromise. Some of the compromise and some of the sites are the Greenbelt scores.
Next question. Oh, you have spoken before. Do you want to get people who haven't spoken?
Hi there. I really just wanted to focus in on the infrastructure plan and what is being developed to sort of make these sites viable and work. So there's been mention of, say, the train line at Waverley. Obviously, a lot of people mentioned bus routes and then existing not being very good. There's sites of employment up at, said, Waverley nearby, but if you try and go from Woodhouse to these areas at the moment, that's a journey into the centre and out again. It's not particularly well functioning. So I think to get a bit of better buy-in, you do need to sort of front load how is this going to be delivered, how is it going to connect up. As you said, you've made the argument that larger sites, you can make that plan, you can make the investment in, say, one of the planning officers said a secondary school. Again, everyone in the room has mentioned A-level and that tier not being available in this area. So, firstly, just a plea maybe to really set out how you're delivering the infrastructure to work with the housing, and also make sure all of the SIL money is going towards that, and any more that can be brought down from, say, Homes England or any other agencies that you can bring in to deliver more of that, please do. Then just a secondary point that every one of us here that is lucky enough to live in a house and, say, not an apartment in the city centre, you roll the clock back, at some point you will meet a greenfield site. All places grow from somewhere. Everyone needs somewhere to live, and as has been noted, 27 years without a plan. That doesn't mean you can just carry on as you are and just not have new housing. You need to have new housing. This is a backlog that people are catching up on. There's just so many people living at home, living in shared houses, not able to have somewhere to start a family, not able to move to employment. and I just wanted it noted that there is support for that to allow next generations to actually
understand what you're saying,
live somewhere. Thank you.
Can people make questions and not speak to you now?
I'll come back on the first point, if I may, and I think you made a very valid point there around the need for infrastructure to come at the right time, and you mentioned some of the mechanisms that are available for us to do that. So people in the room may have seen in the recent spending review £1.5 billion for public transport for South Yorkshire. Sheffield's getting a really big chunk of that. So actually, in terms of upgrading and renewing the tram system, which comes into the southeast of the city, that will happen. There's about £330 million for bus franchising. Will give more control over the routes that we need in Sheffield as well. So, these are some of the answers, but I fully accept the point that the gentleman made there, which is actually on the larger sites, you do have the ability to be able to plan infrastructure as part of a master plan, but it's really critical that those sites are well served by public transport infrastructure, and as Simon said in his presentation, that's what we've tried to do in terms of coming to the final list effectively. Those sites are either the best that we can see in terms of the choices in terms of existing public infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, or public transport infrastructure that's planned for the future, and I would include the reference to the train line that you're talking about, which is the Barrow Hill line, which there are plans to turn that into a tram train extension as well.
Just on that, with the buses, it's very difficult to get a bus to the hospitals from here. Yeah. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about, we're saying that we need to mix the housing up. So how come you're saying a green site would give you a chance to do affordable housing? How come all the affordable housing then will be built on this side of the city?
I think from an affordable housing point of view, I think the first part of the question is why is it easier to do on these sites? It's easier to do on these sites, I think we touched on it earlier, because they're greenfield sites, so actually they're not contaminated. There's less abnormals in that land, and therefore... well, I'll pick the second part of the question up as well. So the second part of the question is, does that mean all the affordable housing will be in this part of the city? No, affordable housing will be across all of the city. What these greenbelt sites do is they guarantee more affordable housing than we are guaranteed on particularly some of the brownfield sites. But certainly they will deliver affordable homes as well. We touched on sort of new Furnace Hill and Neeps End earlier. I think we're going to see in excess of 20% affordable housing across those sort of 1,200 or 1,300 homes. And there will be affordable housing delivered in all parts of the city, including on all of these greenfield greenbelt sites. Well, in terms of the concentration of where the sites are, they're in these parts of the city, but there are parts of the city that are crying out for affordable housing as well. There's some real benefits to be drawn from having affordable housing in your part of the city.
Any more questions? Yep.
Yeah.
How many more?
This might be a little bit of a specific question, but in terms of the infrastructure planning and what needs to be done in terms of education, healthcare, everything that's been mentioned in the area, when it comes to designing the Section 106s, which of course is quite far in advance, is there any conclusion that has been made so far with the integrated care boards, education providers in the area, that they can actually be delivered? Because it's all well and good to say that we can accept commuted sums for that, but that's not what is needed. You can receive commuted sums and say, yes, we'll spend this eventually, but what they actually need is more GPs in the area, more education facilities in the area. So in the conversations that you've been having, because you have said that you are liaising with these other organisations, is there confirmation that that can be delivered? Because that's going to be the ultimate issue. Is it just going to end up this big pot of money that nobody can spend because no one can actually provide any of the services?
The short answer is yes, in the sense of can it be delivered. So Beaver Hill's a good example, and Simon was talking before around what the biggest strategic sites do, which it gives you the opportunity to viably provide infrastructure, but also actually have land for infrastructure. So Beaver Hill is set aside potentially for an additional secondary school and for some burial ground. So there's infrastructure going on that site given its scale. The integrated care board, at least at this level, are suggesting that there's potential to extend existing facilities. But if that's not the case, again, larger sites, such as the ones we're talking about here, are of a scale where you can provide new facilities on that land. So there is the opportunity. When we're in, and this isn't necessarily for S13, so forgive me, but when we're talking about other parts of the city that have got smaller dispersed sites, which are still pretty large in their own right, again, that will be more about pooling money towards existing facilities, but sites of this scale, they are able to provide that infrastructure as part of delivering the sites because they are such large sites. So there's a requirement for an infrastructure plan with these larger sites. So that's how that will be guaranteed. And that will then be delivered through 106, so legal agreements. But yes, the infrastructure plan, so there are steps through this process that will get us to that point.
Thank you. My comments follow on from my previous comments that I made about concerns about Shirtcliffe and the whole Bramley Beaver Hill development. A couple of people have already picked up on some of the things that I was going to say. One of those was about the quality of our green belt, which, according to Sheffield Council, does score better than many areas in the east of the city. Somebody commented about the fact that we could look at why other areas had been rejected. And I'd just like to point out that I don't believe that's our job. We've got all on defending our green belt here. We're just ordinary people. We've got families, commitments, jobs, and doing all sorts of other stuff in our own time. And also touching on the fact that it's been mentioned that this is where affordable housing is needed. We're very grateful to our local MP, Clive Betts, who's been very supportive of our Hands Off S13 Greenbelt campaign. And according to Clive Betts, there is some disquiet in the west of the city because their kids can't afford affordable housing. They certainly won't want to come here, will they? Because we know that we've got nothing of value, according to Oliver Coppard. And I'm going to be going out of here tonight, and I suspect, like everybody else in this room, still utterly and completely confused about why we're being expected to take 44%. Do you know why? No. Have you had an answer to your question? Because I haven't.
I suspect we are reaching a point where you are probably not going to get an answer to that question. I think the officers have given what they consider to be their answers. Yeah, okay.
In terms of why the two larger sites and the sites at White Lane have been chosen, I think we have touched on that a few times. I appreciate it might not be accepted, but having reviewed the sites that we've reviewed, it's our opinion that they are the more sustainable choices of the sites that were available to us. Completely respect the fact that a lot of the audience won't agree with that, but we have set out the conclusions as to why those sites have been chosen. We've also touched on the fact that they are larger sites, and I won't repeat myself in terms of the previous answer, but in terms of what they can do.
When you've got people mouthing off.
Last question.
Chris Guest, resident here in Woodhouse. Finding the coercive nature of the process really disappointing, actually, that there aren't any other things that are up for debate. And to that, I ask our councillors to recruit their fellow councillors to represent the whole of the city rather than just themselves and take the equal share. So that's a message you need to take back. But in terms of the selection of this site, it's quite an easy question probably. Who owns it? Who owns the Bramley and Handsworth sites?
Duke of Norfolk owns Handsworth Hall Farm and Council owns Beaver Hill.
Okay, so it's the Duke of Norfolk.
The majority of Beaver Hill, I should say.
Okay, Duke of Norfolk is going to be another aristocrat who will benefit from this. And the council who have the right to sell or not.
That's what we said. So Handsworth Hall Farms, Duke of Norfolk, and the council own the vast majority of Beaver Hill. Well, or all of it. You know, we're talking about it's.
Seriously, does just feel like a felt tipping exercise where you've got land that you know you can easily parcel out, rather than taking a fight on with every else. It's a path of least resistance that makes us the people who contribute least to traffic pollution, because we have the lowest car ownership in the city. Why here?
There's no. Okay. I mean, we've not encountered much resistance at all from any landowner. They're all promoting their sites. It's not a matter of selling the land to us. The Duke of Norfolk has promoted the land as a development site, so he is willing to make his land available to be developed.
Sorry, I made clear earlier that I voted against this plan. I understand your frustration. That's one of the many reasons I voted against it. The situation now is this is going to the planning inspectors. You need to make your case to the planning inspectors. I understand your anger. But that's not going to help you with the planning inspectors. Please, please. There's been some really good points made tonight. Make those points back to the council and to the planning inspectors, and I'm sure elected members will support you in doing that. Please do that. I understand your anger. I'm not stepping aside from that. But the situation now is you have to convince the planning inspectors. So please do that. You've been a number of really good points made tonight that I think the planning inspectors would listen to. I hope they'll listen to. But that's where it's at. And I can't change that. And I understand your anger. So we have reached that point where we've had our time for this meeting. All right.
Because it's chair at meeting, that's why.
I'm aware of that. Actually, yes, I'm going to give Councillor Roon the right to speak since he's challenged me over my speaking.
I've asked for the right to speak as a local member. I've not heard anything tonight that justifies why this development is so largely based either here in the south east or in the north of the city. Would you like to explain to me why all those sites in the southwest of the city were rejected? Because it seems to me that the way that you've appraised them has led you to the answer that I've seen on the maps tonight. Now,
Chair, I would just say that it wasn't officers who rejected the sites. It was a council decision. We're here to represent a council decision by elected members who were given the opportunity to decide whether these sites were appropriate or not.
And Councillor Owen has made a great deal of the point that he voted against this plan. You've all heard tonight the consequences of voting against this plan. You said what you won't do, Councillor Owen. Would you like to tell me what you would do, what you would vote for? You've seen the consequences. What would you have voted for? Which sites would you have voted for?
Can I just say something?
Well, you can vote against.
Sorry. My name is Councillor Gail Smith. I'm a councillor in Mosborough. I also voted against the plan for a lot of reasons, and so did many of my colleagues that are sat here tonight.
Would you like to answer the question I've asked?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to answer the question. My personal view is I read the inspector's request to the council, which said the council should deliver small, deliverable sites to meet that target. I do not believe this does that. We argued that that was the case, and that was not agreed with. So that I stand by, and that is my answer.
So you would rather have no plan at all?
No, I didn't say that. I said...
That's the consequence.
I said... Sorry, you can carry on shouting at me all you like, Councillor Rooney. Yeah. I said I have read the inspector's original request, and that is my view, that they asked for small, easy-to-deliver sites, and this does not do that. If they had done that, we would still have a local plan to present. So that is my view, and I'm going to stop at that point. Thank you. Also to say now, thank you all for coming. I do understand your anger, and I hear it, and I've heard it, and everybody else has heard it, to be fair. I hope, by the way, Councillor Rooney, you'll be asking your MP then why he opposes this plan as well, but there we are. Thank you for your attendance, and I do urge you again to make your case to the planning inspectors. Thank you.